She hasn't hit a ball yet and the crowd is already screaming. Picture this. A 21-year-old walks through the gates of a tennis complex in Ohio. She hasn't picked up a racket. She hasn't bounced a single ball on the hard court. And the stands are already losing their minds. That is not a metaphor. That is exactly what happened when Alex Eala arrived at the Cincinnati Open. And if you think that sounds strange for a tennis player who, 18 months ago, most casual sports fans outside her home country had never even heard of, stay with me. Because by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why an entire nation of over 100 million people seems to hold its breath every single time this young woman steps onto a tennis court. The question that should be keeping her rivals up at night. Here's the question we're going to answer today, and it's a genuinely uncomfortable one if you're anywhere else in the WTA locker room right now. What happens when a player who has already rewritten her country's entire tennis history walks into the most physically brutal stretch of the season, at the best form of her career, with a target on her back and an army behind her? Nobody knows the answer yet. Not the analysts, not the other players, not even Alex herself. But by the time we get through this story, you'll understand exactly why betting against her right now might be the riskiest bet in tennis. Before we dive in, if you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This is a story that's still being written in real time, week by week, and you don't want to miss the next chapter. Okay, let's go back to where this all started to feel inevitable. A defeat that wasn't really a defeat. Let's start with the loss. Because sometimes the most revealing moment in an athlete's story isn't the trophy. It's what happens right after they lose one. On August 10, 2026, Alex Eala walked off center court at Sobeys Stadium in Toronto having just been thoroughly outplayed. Her opponent was Belinda Bencic, the Swiss veteran and former Olympic gold medalist, a player with 15 years of experience grinding out wins against players twice as hyped as Eala was in that moment. The scoreline read 6-4, 6-0. Bencic won it in just over an hour, taking more than 60% of the total points and breaking Eala's serve in 6 of her 8 service games. It wasn't close in the second set. Bencic didn't drop a single game. And here's the part that made the defeat sting even more. It snapped a 7-match winning streak. 7 matches. Against increasingly difficult competition. Across 2 different countries. In less than 2 weeks. If you know anything about professional tennis, you know a streak like that doesn't happen by accident. It happens because a player's body has been grinding itself into the ground, match after match, city after city, until the legs stop answering the way they used to. And that is precisely what had caught up with Eala by the time she reached that Toronto court. She had played through a brutal, unrelenting stretch, and against a battle-hardened opponent like Bencic, the tank was simply empty. For the first time in weeks, the story around Alex Eala wasn't a fairy tale. It was just tennis, cruel, honest, and unforgiving. But here's the part of the story that explains why people have fallen so hard for her in the first place. She didn't disappear. She didn't sulk. She sat in front of reporters with the exhaustion written all over her face, and she said something disarmingly human. She admitted it had been tough. And then, almost in the same breath, she brought up the smallest, most mundane thing in the world. Her hair needed a cut. Her nails needed attention. And her plan for the only day or two of rest she'd get before Cincinnati wasn't some elaborate recovery retreat. It was exactly that. A haircut, a manicure, a couple of days to just be a 21-year-old before she had to get back on a plane. It's the kind of comment that would mean nothing coming from most professional athletes. But coming from her in that exact moment, it felt like a window into why an entire diaspora has attached itself to this young woman with such intensity. She doesn't perform composure for the cameras. She simply is who she is, tired, honest, and still finding something small to laugh about in the middle of one of the most demanding stretches of her career. She took her short break. She got the haircut. She reconnected with a few friends. And then she packed her bags again, because the tour doesn't wait for anybody, and Cincinnati was next. Rewind. How she got here. Now, to really understand the size of what's happening around Alex Eala this summer, we need to rewind further back, because Toronto wasn't the beginning of this story. It was the middle of one of the most electric stretches any Filipino athlete has produced in decades. Let's start at Wimbledon. In June 2026, Alex Eala became the first player in Philippine history, man or woman, to be seeded at a Grand Slam tournament. She entered the All-England club as the 29th seed after climbing to a career-high world ranking. And she didn't just collect the honor and go home quietly. She beat Mexico's Renata Zarazua in the first round. She battled back from behind to defeat Australia's Maya Joint, the very player who had denied her a maiden title at Eastbourne weeks earlier. And then, on center court, in front of a stunned crowd, she knocked out the defending Wimbledon champion, Iga Swiatek, in a titanic 2-hour, 14-minute battle that included an 85-minute first set. Final score, 7-6, 6-2. It remains the best Grand Slam result of Eala's career, a run to the fourth round that made her the first Filipino player ever to reach that stage at a major. Then came Washington. At the Mubadala DC Open, a WTA 500 event, Eala arrived unseeded. Nobody had circled her name on their bracket. Nobody expected a deep run, and she proceeded to tear through one of the toughest draws of the tournament, beating Olympic champion Qinwen Zhang, second seed Alina Svitolina, and former world number 1 Naomi Osaka on her way to the final. Waiting for her, there was the tournament's top seed and world number 3, Jessica Pegula. The final had to survive a rain delay that stretched the match out over nearly 24 hours. Pegula won the first set, but when play resumed the next day, something shifted. Eala won the last 9 games of the match, closing it out 4-6, 6-4, 6-0, dropping just 8 points in the entire third set. It was her first career WTA Tour singles title, and it made her the first player from the Philippines ever to win a title at that level. "Just pure happiness," she said afterward. It was a title that had eluded her before. She'd agonizingly failed to convert 4 championship points in her only previous tour-level final, at Eastbourne the year before. This time, there was no letting it slip away. From Washington, she carried that momentum straight into Toronto, extending her win streak to 7 matches with victories over Alicia Parks and Katie McNally before Bensick finally brought the run to an end. So by the time she touched down in Cincinnati, this wasn't a young player riding one hot week. This was a player who had strung together 3 of the most impressive tournaments of her career, back to back to back. Wimbledon, Washington, Toronto. 10 wins in her last 12 matches. A ranking that had rocketed from relative obscurity into the world's top 20. The movement nobody saw coming. Now here's where this story stops being purely about tennis and becomes something much bigger, because what's happening around Alex Eala at these tournaments has very little precedent in the modern game. When the Washington tournament chairman, Mark Ine, was asked about ticket demand during her run, he didn't sugarcoat it. He said that over the previous month, at least 80%, and he suspected it was actually higher, of all ticket inquiries his team received were specifically about one question. When is Alex Eala playing? Not about the headline stars. Not about former Grand Slam champions in the draw. About her, a player who wasn't even seeded coming into that event. In Toronto, the demand became a logistical problem for tournament organizers. Her opening match was supposed to be played on the grandstand court, which seats around 2,800 people. Tournament director Carl Hale pulled it off that court entirely and moved it to center court instead, telling reporters, "We can't put her on there because she probably sold upwards of 5,000 tickets." Fans packed the grounds waving Philippine flags. Some of them, according to reporters covering the event, even cheered when her opponents missed serves. A genuine breach of tennis etiquette that nobody seemed to care about in the moment. And it isn't just fans showing up. It's other players noticing publicly, unprompted. Jessica Pegula, the very woman Eala beat in that Washington final, has thanked Filipino fans directly for what they're doing for the growth of the sport worldwide. Coco Gauff, a 2-time Grand Slam champion who could realistically meet Eala deep in a draw at any point, said before the Canadian Open that the new audience Eala is bringing into tennis is something the entire tour should be excited about, because everyone benefits when the sport reaches corners of the world it has never truly reached before. Even Jimmy Connors, 8-time Grand Slam champion, a man who spent his entire career using crowd energy as a weapon, has weighed in publicly on what he sees happening. He's described her Filipino fanbase as a genuine competitive factor, something that can lift her performance while simultaneously making opponents feel outnumbered on court. It's rare for a legend of that stature to spend time analyzing the psychological effect of a 21-year-old's fanbase. But that's the scale we're talking about here. Eala herself, when asked about all of it, doesn't carry the weight like a burden. She's described herself with real humility as just one small piece of something much bigger than herself. A single voice in a much larger wave of Filipino pride that exists whether she's on the court or not. She said she's proud to represent her country, but she's also been careful to point out that the passion in these stadiums doesn't begin and end with her. It belongs to a community that has simply found, in her, a reason to gather and celebrate together. Commentators have started reaching for a very specific comparison. Manny Pacquiao, the legendary Filipino boxer, whose fights once reportedly brought entire regions of the Philippines to a standstill. Because for a few hours, wherever Eala is playing, it can feel like the whole country, and every Filipino abroad with an internet connection, is holding its breath together, watching one young woman carry something much heavier than a tennis racket onto the court. The seeding that shouldn't have happened yet. So when Eala walked into Cincinnati and the crowd erupted before she'd even picked up a ball, that reaction suddenly made a lot more sense. And when the official seedings for the Cincinnati Open came out, something remarkable happened. Something that would have sounded absurd if you'd described it to anyone 18 months earlier. Alex Eala was seeded 17th at a WTA 1000 event, the biggest tier of tournament outside the 4 Grand Slams themselves. It's the highest seeding of her career at this level. Now, to be fair to the full picture here, that seeding wasn't purely a reflection of her ranking. Eala entered Cincinnati at a career-high world ranking of number 20, and she was pushed up into the 17th slot partly because 3 higher-ranked players withdrew from the tournament. Karolina Muchova, the world number 6, who withdrew after undergoing surgery following her Wimbledon final run. Jasmine Paolini, the previous year's Cincinnati finalist, dealing with injury, and Victoria Mboko, also sidelined. But don't mistake that for luck doing all the work. Eala earned her position in the rankings the hard way, through one of the most electric summer stretches any player on tour has produced this year. As a seeded player, she earned a first-round bye, giving her extra time to let the fatigue from Toronto drain out of her legs before having to compete again. For a player who described herself as tired and worn down just days earlier, that gift of extra time mattered just as much as the seeding itself. The draw she walked into was stacked with the very best players alive. World number 1 Aryna Sabalenka at the top, followed by Elena Rybakina, Jessica Pegula, the woman she'd beaten in that Washington final, Coco Gauff, and Mira Andreeva rounding out the top 5. Wimbledon champion Linda Noskova and defending Cincinnati champion Iga Swiatek weren't far behind. Every one of them among the 32 seeded players receiving first-round byes in the tournament's 96-player field. And Eala, at 17, had earned her spot right alongside them. The part where she refuses to get ahead of herself. Through all of this, Eala has kept insisting on a kind of grounded patience that feels almost at odds with the size of the moment building around her. She's talked repeatedly about taking every tournament match by match, refusing to look further down the road than she needs to. After the Toronto defeat, she said she was looking back at the previous 2 weeks as a genuine positive, not despite the loss, but because of everything she'd fought through to get there. She talked about wanting to take the lessons from those 2 brutal weeks and apply them even better once she reached Cincinnati, and eventually New York. And New York is no small footnote here. The US Open begins its main draw on August 30th at Flushing Meadows, the final Grand Slam of the year. Everything happening in Cincinnati is really the last major tune-up before Eala walks into that tournament carrying the best hardcourt form of her entire career. A career-high ranking, a maiden WTA Tour title, a historic Grand Slam seeding and 4th-round run at Wimbledon, and now, for the first time, a top 17 seed at the WTA 1000 level. So what do we actually make of all this? Take a step back and look at the shape of this story. A young woman from a country with almost no tennis infrastructure and no real precedent of producing a top-level singles star, who not that long ago was ranked far enough outside the spotlight that most casual fans had never heard her name, now walks into arenas across North America and gets treated like a returning hero before she's hit a single ball. Opposing players thank her fans even after beating her. Tournaments have had to rearrange their court assignments to handle the ticket demand. And an entire nation, plus its enormous global diaspora, seems to pause whenever she steps onto a court. Nobody can say for certain how far this run goes. Not the analysts, not her rivals, and not even Eala herself, who keeps insisting she's only focused on the very next match in front of her. But it's already impossible to deny that whatever happens next in Cincinnati, and whatever comes after it in New York, the tennis world is watching. And so is an entire country. If you want to see how this story unfolds, make sure you're subscribed because the next chapter is being written right now on the courts of Ohio, and it might just be the biggest one yet.